Hey, well, welcome everybody to today's Tech Talk webinar. It's a part of a series of sessions that we're delivering around technology. Today's session is going to be about the digital route to your return on investment. So the modernisation of the logistics industry is accelerating. As freight forwarders and customs brokers rush to adopt new digital technologies, it's critical to understand which investments will help future-proof your business and improve your bottom line and which will not. So in this webinar, our expert panel, who I'll introduce you to in a minute, they'll discuss a series of questions to help unpack the true ROI of digital technology. Okay, so before I do introduce you to the presenters, because we've still got quite a few people coming on, I'll just launch a quick poll, which will help us in understanding what platforms you're using. So if you could take a minute to complete that form. For those of you who are struggling to access, you've got to maximize your screen. I understand if it's still minimized, you won't be able to answer the question. But I will leave that there. While that's happening, it might be a good time to meet our panelists for today. So we've got Sean Crook, who's a director of Neolink, an FTA member. Shane DePrill, who's the director of Orange Lime Consulting, and I remember meeting with Shane about 9-10 years ago. We kicked off our businesses at about the same time. And then and Julian Alvarez, who's the CEO of Logix Board, who's a major sponsor of FTA. Okay, so Sean, do you want to start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, not a problem, Paul. I'd like to dispel the rumours that we're not related. We just have the same barber and optometrist. But I'm no director of Neolink. We started the business about in 2017, and I'd like to say we're sort of more of a new age freight forwarding business, and we've been sort of really focused on trying to work with customers and provide the most, I'd say, efficient supply chains we possibly can since probably over the last 18 months, 24 months, like everybody else, and the business has actually done really well, and the business is growing quite quickly. So yeah, that's us.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And Shane, Orange Lime?
Certainly, thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. I'm Shane DePrill. I'm one of the directors of Orange Lime Consulting. We're CargoWise partners and have been for about 9 years now. We have offices in the UK, the USA, Australia, and New Zealand, and we work with CargoWise clients in, whether it's implementation, training, or optimizing their software, and we specialise primarily around the pave and workflow productivity areas.
Okay, thanks, Shane. And Julian?
Hi, everybody. My name is Julian Alvarez. I'm the CEO at Logix Board. We are a customer experience platform for freight forwarding companies and customs brokers, directly integrated to operating systems like CargoWise, based in Seattle, Washington in the US, but with customers spread out across the world. And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and excited to be here today.
Okay, well, terrific. So I'll see if I can share the results of that quick poll, which might help the audience or the panelists, I suppose, in terms of the commentary today. So hopefully you can see that okay. But yeah, 2/3 of the audience here are CargoWise users, 13% are using Expedient, 5% Trade Window, 10% don't use a cargo management system at all, and 5% have got some form of other solution. So that might help our panelists in terms of the discussions today, just to know who's on the line. Okay, so the first of the questions I'll put to you, Sean, if that's okay. What types of digital technologies does everyone or do you see forwarders adopting, and which ones are the most important? So yeah, Sean, if you could kick us off on that, and then we might go around to the other panelists.
Of course. I kind of see it in probably two ways, to be honest, Paul. I think if we're you can talk about your cargo management systems, whether it's CargoWise or Expedient. I think there's what technologies you actually have, and I'm sure Shane will talk to this as well, but it's really about what you're trying to achieve. And I think the one thing that we've noticed, I think in particular since we started the business, and we work with Shane, everything disclosed up front. We worked with Shane when we first started the business, and we kind of have been on this automation journey, I would say, for the last 4 or 5 years. it was how we started our business plan. Really, was how can we find the most efficient way to operate, and can we get the system doing the heavy lifting rather than people or outsourcing solutions. So I think first and foremost for me, any technology that drives workflow automation has to be paramount. And I think especially since the pandemic and since COVID started, I think you'll see that parallel across a range of industries. I think it's not just us, we're not alone in the freight world. I think any type of business that can really automate their back-end processes and have their people focus on value-added tasks, I think has probably had an advantage going into COVID. And then secondly, I think that probably the other way I see it is more customer interfacing technologies, and anything that can consolidate data and information sets, I think efficiently and quickly and in real time for customers, I see as being, probably absolutely paramount. I mean, Julian will probably talk to it as well, but the one thing we've noticed since COVID started, the customer expectations have just gone from here to here, and technology has done that. I think, even things like Uber and everything that we do in sort of our day-to-day, that's probably set the bar higher. People are understanding of supply chain problems, but I think what we've noticed more since COVID is that even though they've been understanding, the expectations are still there. And if you're not delivering that, that's where I think that everybody's having their challenges. We're seeing it at the moment with China, with COVID. You have to be providing real-time information to customers to make the best decisions possible. But I'd be interested to speak to Shane, because I'm sure that there's a lot more we could be doing. I'm sure every business can be doing around both the back end in terms of automation and what you're trying to achieve, but then even I'm sure for you, Julian, as well, you've got a lot to add that around customer expectation gaps and real-time data sharing and what you guys are seeing. But Shane, I'd be interested to speak to Shane, because Shane, what are you seeing as sort of the key factor? I guess some of the key sort of line items in terms of automation at the moment.
I think, yeah, look, you're echoing a lot of your points there, Sean, both internal and external. Like externally about being able to deliver value to your customers. So customers' expectations, during the pandemic and even before that were starting to creep up. So, when the question's about, which technologies are the most important to adopt, if you think externally, it's what's most important for your customers, whether that's getting access to real-time tracking information, or whether that's improved quoting processes or improved booking processes to make that process seamless. But certainly when you think internally inside of your own business, where can you get the most gains or focus on the biggest challenges that you have internally? Now, with what we've seen in the world over the last 2 years, certainly that's about having access to data, having access to information to make those operational decisions. So, you touched on workflow, and obviously workflow and Pave we're very passionate about. But when you've got a workforce that is, split and, working from different locations, whether that's different offices or working from home, you want to make sure that all that data is in the system, your knowledge is in the system, and people are empowered to make decisions in real time that deliver value internally for productivity and whatnot. And the data is also being pushed out to the customers in an expedient way.
I think you just said a key thing for me there, Shane. I think in terms of around people being enabled to make the decisions, because I think we spoke about this when we first started. You can have the best workflow automation process set up in your business, but if you're not enabling people to make decisions throughout the job, or you don't even rethink how you're working. I remember when we first started with Pave, you're like, you've got to entirely rethink your way of working, how you structure, how you service. And we saw the advantages definitely in 2020 when it hit, because we enabled a lot of that decision-making processes throughout. I think that doesn't slow everything down. And in real time, people need decisions then and there. If you're going to move a booking, or if you're going to, try and find a different solution to a customer, if you're then slowing everything down on the back end, it's not efficient.
And even Sean, you need talent to support the tech too, right? As the tools become more tech driven, right? We need to either bring people on that are more, let's use the word tech savvy, but more comfortable with using those types of tools, or you've got to raise your own team up to understand how to use those, whether those tools are, understanding how integrations work, or understanding how to make decisions or find information. But, what I see a lot is, there's a lot of traditional, very experienced freight forwarders, still in the industry, but obviously maturing and will be looking to get out and retire in years to come. But the younger generation of forwarders are far more tech savvy, far more comfortable with tools in their hands, but might not be as wide across the freight forwarding skill set. So you've got to also put that knowledge into the system, make sure you've got the talent to support all those decisions.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right.
I
So
would agree
Julian,
with both of those comments. If I can jump in here, I think a key component here is like everything should stem from your operating system or your system of record, whether it's CargoWise or whether it's Expedient. But I think a key component here is making sure that you have systems that are directly integrated to each other, and they should be connected to that source of truth. I think that piece is paramount. But when you play off that, kind of jumping off that source of truth, there's a lot of components that ultimately companies need to cover. Like there's internal process automation, which typically impacts efficiency a lot more in an operation. There's customer experience, which can impact revenue or just helping you retain customers in a much better way, or BI and analytics. But generally, people should strive to work with systems of record or with companies that are integrated to the systems of record. The other component here is that there's not a silver bullet to solve for all of these challenges. Like there is not one provider out there that is going to solve for everything that people need. And I think going best in class for the different parts of the tech stack, I think is really instrumental, as long as that best in class is directly integrated to the operating system. And then the last piece here, to Shane's point, like digitalization, whether vendors or whether people want to admit it or not, requires change management at the end of the day. And making sure that your teams are leveling up in terms of change management, making sure that you're working with really strong partners like Shane to be able to manage that change management, and even working with vendors that are investing really heavily into making that change management successful, I think is a really critical part of thinking about digitalization and the ROI that you can derive from it.
I think, and to your point, Julian, as well, I think that we're talking about digitalization, return on investment, profit and revenue. The reality is people and culture are, just to your point, are central to everything you've just said. Because the problem we have as an industry, if you speak to any recruiter, if you speak to anybody involved in this industry in terms of people, we've probably got a mass, and we saw that, I'd like to think that we probably saw as a bit of an opportunity when we started the business, was that we're going to face a real issue with people over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, I think. And I know I'm probably skipping ahead on some of these questions, but we've got to start to think about, as a broader industry, about how we bring people into the industry, how we train them, what type of skills are they going to be required, because manual data entry and processing is not as important as problem solving, critical thinking skills are going to be. And I know Richard White from WiseTech talks about this all the time. And I think that's a real critical component for what we've got to do for the people coming in, but even the existing people. So if we are going to automate a huge portion of the processes in terms of the back end of the business, what are we actually doing to actually talk about tech stacks, information, data sets, to really educate on what these data sets mean, what it means in terms of communicating with your customers, problem solving, finding different solutions. I think that's just as important, the people and culture stuff, when we're talking about this. It can't just be about profit and revenue. It has to be about people.
Let me come back at both of you guys on 2 points there. One is knowledge and one would be data, right? So one of the things we do with our, if you think about the people and the skills, whether they are in existence or aren't going to be in existence, if you can get your knowledge plugged into your system, right, that's going to help people guide them through that decision making. I know when we implement pavement workflow.
Oh no, we've got a bit of a cut out there.
A big part of that is implementing, work instructions. I'm sorry, a big part of that is implementing work instructions into the workflow. Right? That doesn't mean putting, full-blown SOPs in there, but guidance to help experienced users be able to work through all of those scenarios. And then, obviously you can link to more detailed SOPs outside of the system, but if you can integrate some sort of knowledge or knowledge management system into your day-to-day work, your core operating system, that's huge. And then to Julian's point, when he talked about the back end and single source of truth and all these systems being integrated, I'd break that down into, what I would call like a data discipline. Right? Your data has to be accurate, it has to be reliable, it has to be timely. When we implement world-class workflow systems, for our customers, things can fall over if people don't pay attention to the data or people aren't disciplined to put the data in. So if you're cutting corners on fields, then rules don't work or integrations don't work. Or if you're not, putting in the right data where it's supposed to be at the right time, then whether you've got the world's best tracking system like Logixboard, the data's not going to be there because it hasn't been put into that core system. But certainly, data discipline and knowledge management are two key factors as you drive towards digitalization and bring on these peripheral or supporting adjacent products.
I can tell you as well, Shane, especially I've come from a different world. So when I worked for Nielsen, who are obviously a data business, I can go back to 15 years ago. They had a wealth of data in terms of retail data, shopper data, and using a parallel industry as a comparison, we would give that all to our customers. But I would be on site with a team for 3-4 days a week, working with our customers and actually helping them understand the data, making decisions. And a lot of those parallels can be put into this industry as well, because whether we like it or not, shipping line data at the moment and container tracking data is all over the place. Vessel tracking data is all fantastic and well and good. If it's last logging 6-7 days ago, we're not in control of those data sets. But I think the education process for not just our own people, but I actually think customers, and taking them on that journey, I think the one thing about those real-time data sharing technologies like Logic's board, it can actually bring the conversation together with people at the moment. You can start having those proactive conversations up front, but we do need to start educating merchants, importers, exporters, I think, on what the capabilities are, but also the data sets and what it means and what decisions need to be made at what time. Because it's not to Julian's point, there's no silver lining, unfortunately, in the world of supply chain at the moment.
Correct.
It sounds, Sean, a little bit like it allows you to stop operating from kind of a reactive perspective with your customers and be much more proactive in the conversations that you're having with them. But would love if you can expand on that a little bit.
It was actually, when we first started the business, we always had a very proactive approach to early data capture. So in terms of getting purchase orders in the system early, forecasting 3-4 months ahead, what I would say, giving people access to real-time technologies like we have done, or data technologies in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, that has facilitated probably a different conversation. We were always, I'd like to think we were proactive the way that we worked, but putting customers basically in that position with where we're all talking from the same hymn sheet, we're looking at the same set of data at the same point in time, and we can make a decision then and there on a personalized, customized basis, is really what has made the difference. I mean, we've seen, and I only started doing it really preparing for this webinar, the one thing that we've noticed is customers that are actually take out CIF, CFR, those customers prepaid cargo that's coming from around the world, the amount of time that's taking to get here is crazy. When you take control of your supply chain and you're actually proactively engaging with your forwarder as an importer, and we have those technologies, we're seeing something like a 20% difference in transit times from ex-factory date to arrival date at the port. So take out all the port variables. There's a dramatic improvement. And a lot of the research that's come out recently from McKinsey, MIT, there's huge cost savings around early data sharing, early adoption of technology. So the proof is in the pudding when we're talking ROI, that if you really forget cost at the moment, it's all about getting inventory and servicing customers. A 200 USD difference on ocean freight rate is going to be useless if you don't have stock to sell your customers. So those are the key differences we're finding, that people that are actually using and engaging with us, and we're pushing them towards it, sometimes dragging them to the platform and saying, give us your data earlier, work with us earlier. It makes a tangible difference when you can say, I can get your stuff here 20% quicker if you work with us this way. And what we've noticed, which I was surprised with, I didn't think it was going to be a 20% difference in timings. And it's not just the technology, it's the type of supply chain you then run with your customers to make it more efficient. And that's made the world of difference. I think it's the conversation that it facilitates.
Sean, I've got a question for you. So fascinating listening to you, and again, it's been just great watching your growth since we met a couple of years ago. And I know you're a CargoWise user. I know you're also using Logic's board, and you mentioned that you use Shane services, and you've got probably about 100 odd competitors listening to this at the moment. So without giving away your trade secrets, but just to get an understanding, are you using just the technology that's there, or have you done your own development work above and beyond that?
We've primarily used great partners like, I would say Shane and like working with Logic's board. I think really what's made the difference for us, I think, was the business model that we had starting this. And I think that it's hard when you're a business, Shane talks about change management, people and culture. I think that's the thing that we had probably a little bit in our advantage. And we don't want to talk about the big names in the industry in terms of these digital guys and all the new age forwarders, let's say. But the reality is that when you start something from fresh and you're going with a different perspective and you have a people and a culture and a business model, I think you're more adept to utilizing technology. I think your business model is more flexible and agile to adapt and change different processes and procedures. And we did have that advantage. I can't sit here and say if we were a mature business, that 15, 20 years ago had been set up in a certain way to service what the freight forwarding market was 20 years ago, that we'd be in the same position. I'm not saying that. But I think since we started, we probably started at the right time with the right attitude and the right business model behind the technology. And we have used really good partners. I think we have great, we're still on the journey for automation and workflow. That will continue. But I think what we've really focused on is really upskilling people within the industry and really great operators to work with customers more and more. And I think that's made the difference for us. It's
That's
just going. Go ahead, Shane.
Sorry, Shane, can I interrupt just for 1 minute, because I failed on one very important thing at the beginning of all of this. I should have mentioned that for the audience, if you've got any questions, if you could type them into the chat facility. We are going to let the conversation flow, and I won't interrupt too many more times.
Sure.
But at the end of the session, then I'll be reading out the Q&A that comes from the group. So please put in your questions. Shane, hopefully you didn't lose your train of thought, and I'll hand back.
Sure. It's on a good point. I mean, there's a very big difference between a relatively new organisation and how Sean's driven that, which is very impressive at Neolink, and then obviously mature forwarders, because we find there is a difference when we work with customers. We can put in the world's best workflow, but I'll often comment that half of its configuration, the other half is that change management piece. And different customers, when we've talked about change management, people and culture, I think that the change is often the hardest bit, because a lot of times people can be set in their ways, and now we start bringing in these technologies. And when you talk about digitization, and obviously every business, everyone listening on this, should have a strategic vision of where you want to be in 5 or 10 years, but that path to get there can be a little bit rocky at the start. You've got to be able to drag in change, drag in additional training, drag in additional talent if needed to pull that up. I mean, I often talk about a role that I very, very strongly feel is emerging inside of freight forwarding, because it's obviously our core expertise, that isn't IT and it isn't operations. It's like a control tower type, like one level above the ops. They're not on the tools, but they're pushing and pulling the levers. People that can diagnose why an operations trigger didn't fire. People that can diagnose why the Logics board website isn't updated with a particular bill of lading number because it wasn't entered. So people that have that little bit of a different type of knowledge, they understand the operations, they understand the IT, but they understand how everything links together. And I think that role is becoming increasingly important in modern freight forwarders, because we have so many connections. You can't expect, an expert export air freight clerk or your best import sea freight operator to also necessarily understand how all those connections work, how the big picture fits together, and be able to diagnose those on the fly, because they can become quite frustrating. And sometimes those little bits of frustration can also cause solutions to unwind, right? Or cause implementations to go longer for projects. So you've got to be prepared to elevate people into those roles that can also understand, where your business has those digital links. I think that's becoming more and more important as we have more technology that we can connect with, whether it's AI tools for reading documents into the system, or Logics board type tools, or integrations with carriers and so forth as well. I could count umpteen scenarios where we've seen customers where their IT teams have put in e-bookings with carriers, but 6 months later they find out the operations teams aren't using them because a couple of them failed. They couldn't figure out why, so they've just reverted back to manual, but they haven't elevated that up to IT to figure out what's going on or how to improve that. So you want to make sure it sticks. Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Shane, the one thing that I know that I think some of the big things that are coming out, even about, from a people perspective, I think around, great resignation or whatever you want to call it. One of the big things employees want, and we survey employees every year, they want more autonomy and they want the ability to make decisions. So I think it is important you bring your people on the journey, but you actually get feedback from them. Because I think if you're actually getting the feedback from them and they're actually contributing, I think I can imagine you would see that quite a lot, Shane, where if the whole team is behind it and they're actually actively participating in it, and it's not, you want people that can make decisions still and have to make the decisions, but if they're on the journey, I'd imagine that you would have seen great case studies around the world where you'd see people in the freight forwarding industry that would actually then they see the better cut through in terms of efficiency, return on investment if they take them on the journey.
Sean, I'm very utopian, and you're going to make me come up with a couple of corny sayings here, like, teamwork makes the dream work, or, the team of champions versus a champion team. In all those situations, obviously, our love for paper and workflow inside of CargoWise, but that really is about collaboration, about teamwork. And when you get a team that's working in harmony and people understand the impact of what they do on whether it's a colleague or a downstream process or an external system, it becomes very powerful. And then introduce visibility tools to control that, decision support systems. Yes, 100% with you on that one.
Great.
So does that answer the
Julian,
first question?
yeah, no, but I'd be interested to hear from Julian too. Again, and Shane, I know you're working with customers around the world, but Julian, what based on your observations, you've got a lot of Australian customers now as well. How do we sit compared to forwarders in other parts of the world?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I feel like that's a trick question, but I think for me, part of what I was thinking about as we were having this conversation is how do you balance a little bit about getting your team and your people prepared for digitalization, also understanding that there's a really strong why now factor. And ultimately, if you invest in digitalization, like, it will produce really strong results in ROI. I think to answer your question, the Australian market, honestly, has become a really important hub for us in terms of a customer base. I think there's been really strong moves towards digitalization in the region, and generally what we found is a really strong push to digitize from freight forwarding companies. I think it's interesting. I don't think it's like that in every single region. I think the Australian market is pretty ahead of the curve there, but we have seen, regardless of geography, regardless of what operating system people have internally, regardless of their size, everybody's starting to think about how do they digitize the different parts of their tech stack. But people really thinking continuously about, like, where's the ROI going to be here for me, and how do I manage the change management components of the business? Which is why working with companies like Shane, really important, but also we invest like really heavily into making our customers successful, and not just being a software vendor that comes in and says, like, here's a piece of software, like, we'll come back in a year or two once we have to talk about renewal. But investing or working with partners that are investing really heavily in your success, I think that piece is paramount. The other aspect, Paul, that you brought up, which I had a thought on before, you asked Sean if he was working with partners or building out some of his own technology as well. It's a conversation that we have pretty continuously. But ultimately, I think people have to keep their focus, right? Like, companies need to choose what niche do they want to play in. People need to choose, like, what problems they want to solve in the operation. Even Shane bringing up, like, there should be a layer that sits on top of ops that's looking at problems. Like, I think focus for people and for businesses is really critical. I think last year we raised $45 million in venture to pour and invest solely into the product that we're developing on the customer experience front. And that's the niche that we play in. Like, how do we invest really heavily into this? So I think for freight forwarding companies, ultimately deciding, like, do they want to be software companies? Do they want to be freight forwarding companies? I think for freight forwarders, focusing on getting really good at their core business and focusing on training and retaining their talent, I think that's probably the priority, and they can partner up with vendors like us that raise a lot of venture capital to be able to build kind of best-in-class solutions.
I just want to touch on what you just said. I just want to touch on what you said then, Julian, which was interesting. The number one thing, which I was reading actually on a report the other day, was the number one thing outside of salary increases for people in their jobs, the second most important thing was getting access to new tools that can make their job easier. And that was going to make it to see, and I'll send through the report for anybody that's listening in on this, because it rings home true that the demand is there, not from just from the market, but from people internally. Like, the amount of what the guys go through on a daily basis, I think, in terms of trying to solve problems, it's a high-paced, high-energy, challenging business at times, and you want to make sure that you're looking after your people, you're looking after the staff, and we're really giving them everything they can to make them feel like that they're really doing the best for their customers. Because nothing is worse in this industry than if you look back on how things have been done historically, You know that a shipment's delayed, you don't want to communicate it, and you hit a delay notice maybe a week after it's departed, and there's a lot of people that do it. So you want to give people the confidence to confront a problem when it happens, and the technology facilitates that. And going back to your question to me, Paul, we don't see ourselves as a software business, and we can't, because we need to know what we're good at. We need to be able to bring in partners that really understand all of these different technologies and how we can get a return on investment. Because no matter, as a business owner, you will look at your P&L, and it's software's a negative on the P&L. No matter how you look at it, and everybody complains about it, everybody has a whinge, but the reality is it is scalable. And if you invest in it with your time and your people, with your customers, you'll get a return. We have noticed that since we first started partnering with LogicSport and with CargoWise, if we really put that time and energy into the customer base and literally almost drag people to the platform, we get the effort. We've had our number 3 user on LogicSport who uses it every day, told me and told one of our business development guys, I am not going to use that platform. He's been in the industry for 40 years. He's imported. He's a good, decent sized importer. He would never use it. And secretly, he doesn't know we know he's using it, but he still says, oh, no, I'm not going to use it. But he uses it every day. And and the conversations are less. They're more efficient in terms of the type of questions that he asks us. And we have good, engaging conversations. But you do have to drag. We're trying to drag the industry with us a little bit. And it's not just forwarders. It definitely is on importers and supply chains as well, to engage with forwarders, share data, and then engage in that conversation early.
It's funny, Sean. Yeah. Sometimes when we're doing, workflow projects, we obviously hit, negativities in some areas that, this is the way we've always done it. We don't want to change. I've been doing this for 25 years. And sometimes those people are actually the biggest proponents for change when they see how it can make their life easier. Like if they've been doing manual reports, or they've been exporting things to Excel for years, or they've been manually sending documents, doing phone calls, all of a sudden we can take all that off them, and with a few little changes in the way they work, free up hours and hours a week in terms of that. But yeah, you're 100% right. That's really good to hear too about that.
That is, it definitely works.
Yeah, and look, again, thanks all for that, because again, I wanted to just get an understanding, and you've answered it now, whether, Sean, the tools are there ready for any of the listeners, and the answer is yes, they are. You don't have to go above and beyond. And Julian, I honestly thought that the need to raise the $45 million was to pay our sponsorship invoice. But obviously there's a bit in reserve. Okay, so look at it. This has all been a pretty good segue into the next question now, which is the return on investment. And we've touched on it now. Look, I suppose our industry has been well ahead of the curve in the use of technology. Going back to even the 1970s, and when Compile was first sort of rolled out by the Australian government, and then over time other systems came in. I suppose this sector got dragged into the technology world, basically led by the Australian government, who was quite innovative in its time. We might have stagnated then for a period, and yes, all the customs brokers online would be acknowledging that technology has delivered a lot of efficiencies for them in entry creation, import declarations. But so many other parts of the business now, it looks as though we've got an opportunity to leap ahead. So again, maybe I'll even kick off with Shane on this question. Where do you see that forwarders now, through digitisation, are making more money or cutting their costs?
You're breaking up a little bit there, Paul, but I got the gist of the question. Look, what we do with a lot of customers, obviously we implement workflow, and echoing some of the comments from Sean earlier on, it's easy to understand, your raw costs each day. I think we've just lost Paul. Are we still online? It looks like
I'm still there. I've just turned my camera off.
Okay, no problem, Jip. So if you've got like a 12-step process, and depending on how much detail you want to go to, you can create value stream maps or timesheet surveys, whatever you might have. But let's say that these processes you have end to end might take 45 minutes, right, for argument's sake, by the time you go through the 12 steps. With workflow, you can eliminate many of those steps, right? So I talked before about data, and I'm very big on accurate data. But if you've got people that are registering jobs and it takes them anywhere between 2 and 10 minutes to register a job, and you can cut that in half. Or you've got people that are manually auto-rating jobs, and you can cut that down to basically 0 time by using tools in the system. Or you've got people that are manually sending pre-alerts and arrival notices, and if you can eliminate that, you can cut significant amounts of time out of the process. Now that essentially delivers you capacity into the business. Now you can take whatever tools you might use in terms of BI or analytics and metrics and very quickly be able to say, well, okay, if we invest X amount in automating certain behaviors, then we can return X amount of capacity, or capacity to the business that then, the likes of Sean can then sell and bring on more business without the need to increase headcount. But I will stress that, going back to that change management piece, we can implement these workflows, but the business needs to drive that change through. Like, what we see as a critical success factor in these roles is not just the people on the coalface or those frontline staff, but that their management teams, their department heads and supervisors, making sure those changes are actually driven through. So to that end, it's fairly easy to then, take measurements of what type of capacity you should expect, and then be able to, report on that data from your system. Yeah, add a layer over the top like PAVE, which is about accelerating productivity, and that's about removing all the let's call it busy work, for want of a better description, that's taken up with people trying to find the work they need to work on. So after automating certain behaviors, we now want to compress the time it takes. And that doesn't mean people are working like robots, because going back to what Sean said before, people want a great work environment. So we tend to take a bit of a gamification approach to how we sort of implement workflow on PAVE, but certainly, doing those raw calculations in terms of taking a 45-minute job that might take 6 weeks to do, or it might elapse, and cutting out those functions. If you couple that with, what people might be doing outside of their systems, like manual spreadsheets, which still exist, and you can then focus on the data quality to improve the ability of the system to generate those reports, or you introduce tools like Logicsboard, then you can cut out significant time that happens outside of the system and free up your people's time to work on building stronger relationships with the customers, or investing more in training, or increasing their own skills, their own ability to sort of drive these tools.
Look, and again, I know this webinar is really a thought leadership piece. It's not really meant to be a bit of advertising, but we're getting a few people. Obviously, they're familiar with the different cargo management systems out there, but there's a few questions about what is actually Logicsboard. It might be worthwhile, Julian, if you just spend a few minutes just to explain what the product is.
Sure, I'm happy to. Logicsboard is a customer experience platform. So the users of our product are actually the customers of the freight forwarder or the customs broker. We integrate directly into CargoWise and keep CargoWise as your source of truth, where your operators live and kind of do all of their activities on their day-to-day basis. Logicsboard acts as a customer front end. It's the place where your customers can come in, track all of their shipments, manage their supply chain, look at their POs, look at all their accounting, analytics, pull in documents, etc. So really, we're building kind of a one-stop customer experience platform where your customers can manage all of their supply chain during the entire life cycle of a specific shipment. I think one of the interesting approaches there, when it comes to ROI, I think a lot of their internal tooling is built a lot more for efficiency. What we typically find with Logicsboard, it's a really big revenue driver or a churn reduction platform. You asked me earlier, Paul, like differences that we see between the Australian market and other markets. When we're talking to US customers or European customers, a lot of times they'll call us like frantic and tell us like, I'm about to lose one of my biggest customer accounts because I can't offer them the level of visibility that they're asking me to be able to provide. That's typically not something that we hear as much from the Australian market. We do see our customers though, like leveraging our platform both to increase revenue, but just to be able to provide much better customer experience and much better customer service than they're offering today. So I'd say software typically falls in like various lines, like can be revenue acceleration, churn reduction, risk mitigation, efficiency. We really focus on kind of those first three buckets, which is revenue acceleration, churn reduction, and just risk mitigation based on where the industry is headed towards and trends that we see in other markets of customers potentially losing really big key accounts because they don't have the right level of technology and visibility to offer them. Sean is one of our customers, though. I'm sure he can add a ton of color there so it doesn't seem like a self-serve kind of plug-in for me.
Julian, my comment to that question was very much internal focused, right, on the core, but I'd be interested to hear from Sean from a value perspective out there when he's selling.
No, I don't just see it as a way of winning new business, and I think it even just in terms of keeping customers sticky. I think that's part and parcel of it. I think what customers really care about is how can you make sure that you're obviously keeping my supply chain as efficient as I possibly can. I actually think that Logic's board and real-time data sharing platforms, I think it's a combination of the two, right? It's a combination of having the workflows and process and automation in the background with CargoWise and working with somebody like Shane that can give you that level of efficiency to be focused on working with a platform that enables you to have a conversation. Because I think that's probably where we've seen the best return on investment, because if we just give, anyone can just give anybody access to the platform. It's not and I think there's some benefits in that. You can give people access to a platform, they can see the visibility, they can see what's going on. But I think the actual conversations that go on behind it are probably the most important thing. And that's what drives value and drives the return on investment. If you can, and you're not going to solve everything. I mean, I'll give a perfect example. We literally had a shipment coming out of India. Singapore's, you guys will know, 4 or 5 week backlog at the moment. And we've got vessel tracker, everything's fantastic. And the vessel was supposed to transship in Qingdao, and the shipping line decided to go to Korea without telling us. And we can see this vessel going towards Korea, and we're like, the ETA is out of date, what's going on? And this is a serious situation for our customers' business, because they're made to order supply chain and they've got massive risks on their business now. And so it takes an operator to look at it and say, well, okay, clearly something's going on here. The data's not accurate. The shipping line are making a call here based on, for whatever reason, we're going to call, we're going to tell them something's going on. You're not going to like what you're going to hear, but we're going to get in front of it now. You might have inventory here to make a decision that can then really drive customer satisfaction to another level. So I actually think really the benefits of it, and not just on the freight forwarders end in terms of return on investment, I think it's more around supply chain efficiency based on the conversations you have with the tool. And if you don't have that, to Shane's point, change management, you can implement all the data tools. And Shane, you always used to say, what is it, like Wise taking all the data back of house systems, you can have them sitting in first gear. I remember you saying it's like having a Ferrari in first gear. And I love that. I love that terminology, because it's true. You've got to.
I think I pitched that from Richard White, just in case he ever sees this.
I loved it. I thought that one's a good one, because you don't, if you don't have it, if you don't use it, and you don't have a business model that fits. And Julian, touching on what you said about stickier customers and revenue, I think because, and we can be open about it, digital forwarders haven't launched in Australia. If they do, then we're going to be up for it. And it's going to be a challenge, because they are going to take market share. They understand data. And regardless of what we say, they have taken market share. This is a great way for us to really try to either protect our market share, work with customers, because there's some great freight forwarding businesses out there really understand freight, but the customer conversation's evolving and changing. And I think that's where we've probably won quite a lot of work in the last 24 months, is we're trying to solve those problems of what's going on. We're putting consolidation to one side and all the benefits that forwarders get from shipping volume, and saying we have to be customer centric. We have to work with our and there are big forwarders out, big digital forwarders out there that are doing it, and we have to protect and safeguard our business.
Shane, so again, a lot of the questions that or comments coming back to us on this is, it all comes, so much of it is sort of focused on price. And I think Sean mentioned it earlier, it's on the P&L, and nobody likes to pay. And again, a lot of the feedback is from small to medium size forwarders. Is the digitization a viable option for the small to medium, or is it for the medium to large, or is it applicable to all?
At the end of the day, I think success comes from being able to adapt to these changes in technologies, right? Going back to what I said before about change management, or that, I love my analogies. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. If you get an external tracking tool like Logic's board, but you're not going to direct your customers to it, and you're still going to do manual Excel sheets for them, you're going to fail. If you're going to get all these workflow automations from us and get them put in, but you're still going to manually send emails to yourself just so you can check they've been sent, you're going to fail, right? If you're going to get AI tools to import data and not be able to whether it's use it for whether it's importing pre-alerts or commercial invoices, then you're going to fail. So I think success comes from driving through that adoption. And obviously when we do our projects, we talk to customers about, there will be a bumpy part, right? And generally it's right after you implement. You can do your UAT testing, you can do your training, you go live. It gets uncomfortable for a little while in a lot of scenarios, but you've got to push through it, right? And you've got to be able to adapt to it. And I think the price is prohibitive if you don't adapt to it and you don't understand where you're going when you make that decision to dive into something, right? Where do you want to be in 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, and keep pushing towards that.
Is it possible, and the answer might be no, but is it possible to actually demonstrate what the ROI is? Like if you were to go into a forwarder and because they'll go, okay, this is going to cost me, I don't know, $100,000. How am I going to see that return?
Yeah, so we have a very raw calculator. Calculating value is very, very difficult, but we have a raw calculator where we look at, okay, if the average price of an operator is X and you do this amount of jobs, then in theory, this is the capacity of an operator and this is your utilization. And then you can figure out the cost of a job from average job profits. And you can extrapolate that out to say, okay, well, if we could take out 10% of job time, then what are we going to give back in terms of capacity and what are we going to give back in terms of capacity or the ability to do jobs. That's a very crude way of looking at it because there might be external things, but yes, it is possible to create some high level calculations to justify these things.
Okay.
I can see you wanted to jump in, Sean.
Oh, look, it's an investment. I don't care. It's an investment, and you have to look at it that way, because if you don't look at it that way, I think you are automatic. If you're trying straight away, and I've come from outside the forwarding world, I've come from the customer side of the supply chain world, and at the end of the day, the way that the pricing models are set within the forwarding industry, it's line by line. Look at a forwarder's invoice. It's line by line, and you want to be able to match up in a perfect world revenue and cost, and it doesn't work like that. And you are going to and I agree with Shane though. I think you can find crude efficiency models where you're looking at efficiency gains in terms of more shipments and volume through an overhead. But if you look at the context of what we're doing with customers at the moment, the amount of time we invest pre-planning with our customers has gone up probably 3, 4, 5-fold. That's outside of the system. So I look at it and say, well, if we didn't invest that time and energy on the pre-planning shipment part of the process, I'm going to lose that customer. Because if I'm not trying to find them a solution or find an option for them that works, that revenue goes regardless. So I think that you do have to think about it in terms of investment. I think you do have to think about it in terms of it's going to enable me to win more customers, keep them more stickier, if you like. That's the way that we tend to look at it. I think if you look at it I expect over time, probably our technology and software on a per shipment basis, we should see some economies of scale and some efficiencies for sure. But it's an investment. You need to have it in your business. Otherwise, I think we talk about, one of the questions here is about what's the potential costs if we don't digitize. And I'm very pragmatic about this. I think if we don't, I think fast forward 10 years, I think Paul, to your point, I think the industry has used technology in the past in a really good way and found efficiencies. But on the customer end, I think we're lagging way behind as an industry.
Sean, I'll touch on and probably commenting on some of Julian's stuff, the differences between different countries. Down in Australia, we've had CargoWise for many years, right? But how many forwarders really look at how the technology is evolving and all the new functionality that's coming out? Take like Julian's software as well. It's evolving. Things are changing. The AI company we work with, Vector, they're continually evolving. But I see a very big difference between the functionality that's used in Australia versus Europe and the US. And I think primarily that's because we've had CargoWise for a very long time, right? But then e-bookings have come out, container tracking, e-docs, better note functionality, a whole host of functions, right? But when the US, European, and Southeast Asia regions get the tech, they're picking it up with all this new functionality. So they're being able to leverage that immediately. But I think a lot of Australian freight forwarders, Australian, New Zealand freight forwarders don't have that, whether it's the resources or haven't got anyone allocated to look at the new things that are coming out that they could be using. And then going back to what I was saying before about, who does that role, right? Because the IT guys don't understand business. They can just send you an update note, and the operations people are too busy to actually say, well, hang on a tick, this could really deliver some great results for us. Those results could be internal, right, and efficiencies, and those results could be external and more value to the customers, like you're just mentioning, Sean. So that's another big thing that wants to improve.
I want to touch on what you said there, Shane, because I'm not giving away trade secrets here, but we're literally about to we've got somebody in our team who's going to be perfect for the role that Shane's talking about. But I'm still going to get Shane in, and we're going to still go through a conversation and talk about what does our next 12 to 18 months look like. And that's a rolling plan because technology is evolving so quickly. So I think digitalization, in terms of looking at, in terms of best case, best practice, it's a never-ending journey. And we've trialed AI, we've trialed different things that haven't worked or worked to what we would have expected, and then we have to reevaluate what we think that, do we need to change our internal processes? It's an ongoing line item as part of our business that digitalization is never going to stop, and you can't just invest, walk away from it and say that's it, we're done. It is an ongoing people allocate, and that's why Shane's talking about these roles, because I do think they are going to become, I think they'll become even more important. I think you'll have multiple people within the freight world over the next 10 years, Shane, that are going to become specialists in these roles, and it won't, you'll still need to go work with an OLC, and you're not going to change that, but it is an ongoing line item. It's not going to change.
It's not a switch you flick. It's a change in the way you work, which is what I was saying about workflow and PAVE as well.
I will add there as well. The technology that exists today will be stale in 2 years. Even our platform as it exists today, 2 years from now, will be completely stale. The more technology advances, the harder that change management component actually becomes. So whereas, I mentioned us raising all of this money to provide your sponsorship, Paul. No, but really, like, raising all this money to invest heavily into building a better product. There's a lot of different vendors and software companies out there doing the exact same thing. We're literally, like, we're trying to push out new products, new functionalities every 2 weeks, every month, so that we can actually, keep us ahead of the curve and keep you all ahead of the curve as well. But that's a really big part of this. Like, people continuously ask us why now, and it's like, first, you're going to see huge advantages now. Ultimately, like, we have ever only had 2 customers not renew with us. One of them shut down their freight forwarding operation, and the other one changed their operating system to a system that we were not integrated to. Like, a really big component here is getting ahead of that digital transformation now would give you results now, but ultimately better position you to be successful in the future as well. But that can easily snowball and become a lot more unmanageable.
So to that, you just got to start the journey. Just start somewhere, identify one point you can go at and attack.
I agree.
Okay, look, we're getting close to our hour. We've still got about 8 or 9 minutes. So I've got a couple of questions. One specifically for you, Sean. Sean, you mentioned your customer expectations changing. What specifically have you noticed in terms of change in the last few years, and how have you adapted to that?
I think let's take, if you're taking COVID out of it a little bit, I think the expectations are there around real-time data sharing technologies from a lot of customers that we do meet with. I think I think that's because a lot of these, if you're looking at Uber and you're looking at all these different apps, I think a lot of them have kind of trained people into thinking that I can get my information in real time, easy, I can see where it is, I can see where it's on the way. And I think that has trained psyche into, Shane touched on it, a lot of young people coming into the industry are used to being able to track exactly where their clothes are that they ordering, click and collect, they can have it now. And we've started to see this coming. I think probably even 5 years, we started the business on this premise, really. It was just we were trying to find the right partners to probably work with, which we found in the end. But I do think that's the thing that we've seen, is that the demand is definitely there for those technologies. And then as COVID's transpired, I think they've become essential to solving problems. I think in terms of what we've seen with supply chains, and I think people are very understanding about. I think people are very understanding of the supply chain situation. Everybody understands that Shenzhen is in lockdown, but in 2 weeks' time, whenever it is, they'll come out of lockdown. The demand's going to be there. they're going to want their stuff straight away. They're going to want to find alternatives of getting out of Guangzhou, maybe going up to down into Hong Kong or up into Ningbo. They're going to want solutions. So that's what I mean by the customer expectation level has risen, because their customers' expectation level has risen. If you're shopping online now and you want to buy something, I mean, there's been Ship It have just launched a deal with Uber where you can buy clothing online and have it delivered to you in less than 30 minutes. That's the world that we're living in. So I do think that customer expectation gap is going to grow, and it's not just me saying it. There's Intercom reports that have come out surveying 1,200 businesses that are looking at exactly the same thing.
Can I add something there as well? A lot of the times, and this really does break down by region, honestly, but in some of the regions of the world, like, we're often hearing, like, if freight forwarding companies are not showing up with better data sharing platforms or better visibility platforms, like, they're not even able to bid into RFPs, honestly. Like, they're just getting taken out of the entire process. We've seen, I can think of a European customer of ours that went into an RFP process with a lot of different freight forwarding companies. It boiled down to 3 of them. Our customer, which is a small freight forwarding company, Flexport, which no one has mentioned, but I had to drop the name there, and Kuehne+Nagel. And our customer actually ended up winning the business, and they went back to their customer and said, how did we win this? And it was, well, you were offering me the same level of experience that Flexport was offering, but much better execution and much better customer service. And you were offering me better visibility and better experience than what Kuehne+Nagel was able to offer to me. So a big component there is, like, eventually all regions catch up to the status quo, but a big component of it is, like, we're seeing customer expectations in some cases really negatively impact freight forwarding companies because they're not able to level up quickly enough, or they haven't. And in other regions, freight forwarders taking advantage that curve hasn't accelerated fast enough yet, and being able to leverage that to grow their businesses. But pretty fascinating. I think that's only going to continue to accelerate, frankly. And the more supply chain disruptions that we have, the more your customer expectations change towards digital and towards you being able to provide that visibility real time.
That visibility just comes back to data, right? Data in the system, data being there. People want to see their data and they want to make decisions, or they want to get information from it immediately. Look at what BI has done over the last few years, and we do some BI work for some of our clients. And nobody wants a 48-column, 300-line Excel sheet, right? They just don't want it. They want visuals. They want to be able to see it. They want to be able to interact with that data. They want to be able to slice and dice it, reuse it for an internal presentation, and then make informed decisions with it when they want to. Not when they wait for a 7 a.m. scheduled report or have to ring up somebody to get it. They want it immediately.
Okay. Look, gentlemen, again, only got a couple of minutes to go. I think we've answered most of the questions, but I've got one here which I wouldn't mind putting to the group, and we might sort of wrap up on this. Agreeing totally with the commentary on the need for good and available digital information. There is value across the board, small, medium, or big makes no difference. To enhance that, however, supply chain is not just in Australia as such. There needs to be visibility end to end. How do we do that without manual communication? I'm thinking here, getting information from overseas into your, say, CargoWise LogicSboard system. I run CargoWise and LogicSboard and I'm happy, but I'm looking at the next step where you can integrate.
Sean and I actually, and Julian, we were talking about this last week, weren't we? Like when we sort of did a bit of prep for this webinar, and quite right, that information stops, right? There's still a fragmented set of chains. I mean, sure, if we specifically talk about the CargoWise piece, then that conversation that you as a freight forwarder have with your customer extends further than that into your supplier, right? Now, obviously you can't choose your customer's suppliers, but you can encourage your customer to start talking to their vendors about the information they can share, the portals they can share, and your overseas forwarding agents. I mean, if you've got CargoWise, you've got a lot of luxuries in terms of exchanging data, but yeah, 100% opening up those conversations to go back up the chain, so to speak, is incredibly powerful. And you probably, as a forwarder, can't influence who they buy from, but like Sean said, you can open the conversation and start to ask the right questions to see if you can access that data.
That early data capture is so critical. I think that is just, and just to forget just forwarding, I think for an entire supply chain's efficiency, if you have that data early and you have a forecast and you have those supply and you have that that conversation at the ground level at origin, it makes a massive difference. So we don't operate any other way. We want to get that data in early. It enables us to make better decisions. In turn, we have better relationships with the carriers and shipping lines because we're extremely accurate in terms of how we forecast. So that early data capture, I think, is fundamental. But go back one step even before then, that does come down to importers and exporters as well, in my mind, of actually negotiating the right Incoterms with your suppliers, taking control of your supply chain, and then being able to make those decisions. Because if you don't take control of your supply chain, our numbers are clear. The difference between people that have control of their supply chains and people that don't, there's a dramatic difference in inefficient, even just pure transit times. So I know there's commercials and there's a whole, you're going through buying agents. I know the way different suppliers work, but just taking control of your supply chain is almost the first step to getting that early data capture, right, Shane? Otherwise, you're full.
The sooner in the process you optimize, the more benefit you gain. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, Julian, I'll let you have the last word.
I think, honestly, Sean and Shane nailed it here. I think, to me, like, one of the things that, the couple things that resonate is Sean expressing how much more efficient his customers that are using technology are being at managing their supply chain and being able to get things to their location faster. That, to me, is mind-blowing and amazing to hear. But one of the things that really resonated for me also was from Shane, which is just start. Ultimately, like, this is a journey. It's not meant to be everything has to be in right now, but just starting on that digital journey, regardless of what component of the stack you're focused on. I think ultimately that's critical because it will lead to a ton of value right now, but also help facilitate a lot of these processes in the future as well.
Okay, well, look, you've brought us right on time. We've been talking now for an hour. So again, Shane, Sean, Julian, thank you very much for your time today. I think it's been a real eye-opener. We'll be sending a copy of this recording to all of the attendees today. We'll also, gentlemen, if you're comfortable with it, I'll copy you into that. So if any of the attendees want to reach out to you direct, they can. And yeah, again, I really appreciate your time, and I thought it was a terrific session. So thanks again, and everyone stay well, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul. Sean and Shane, thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.